Hi, my name is Jay Clark, and I'm an AI and ML specialist with AWS. And in this video, I'm going to take you through a quick tutorial of using SageMaker GroundTruth. GroundTruth is a tool for manually and automatically labeling your datasets. So let's first discuss our datasets. And in this example, I'll be using two data modalities. The first will be images that I've selected from my laptop background, and the other will be a CSV around network sensor logs. So a malicious activity use case. I'm going to upload that data into S3. And for me, I'm going to use my individual SageMaker bucket. If you have another bucket you'd like to use, feel free, obviously. And I will add a folder for the images on my desktop. Yep, and there are 148 images here. If you look at them, you can probably discern what they're about, but we're going to upload this. And while this is uploading, I'll probably pause recording, but let this upload and we should have some images there. Okay, so we've uploaded our images into our S3 bucket. If we look in the wallpapers folder, we'll see the number of images there. That's great. Now we can head over to SageMaker and GroundTruth. And if we go to the SageMaker dashboard and look on our left-hand panel, we'll see GroundTruth. And we select that, we'll have the option between labeling jobs, labeling datasets, and labeling workforce. So the first thing we have to do is set up a workforce. And there are three options that are provided. The first is Mechanical Turk. So you can have users of Mechanical Turk label your data points. The second that I'll discuss is the vendor. So if you want a third-party service to be your labeling service, you have access to that here. But for us, we'll be using the private workforce. And this is really just a team internal to your organization. So we can create this private team. And we'll just add in the team details. So we'll give it a name, data quality SME team for me. And then we can add workers as well. So you'll just put in the email addresses for anyone that you want to have access to this team or want to be part of this team. I'll put this in, but I won't show this here for obvious reasons. We can choose an organization name. I'll just go with data quality org. That seems fine. A contact email is around the person that will be in charge of any issues, or the person to contact for any issues. And then we can create our team. So I'll sort of pause this recording, but enter my information. So once you have created your team, it'll take you back to the private tab and you'll have information about your workforce. So specifically, and then what you'll use most of the time will be access to the labeling portal, which is how you'll actually label those data points and in our case, images. And if you look below, we'll have just our team, which is our data quality SME team. And further than that, we'll have any workers that are assigned or added to that team. And so you can enable, disable, delete, and invite new workers. So at this point, we're actually ready to make a labeling job. And so if we go over to GroundTruth, we'll click on labeling jobs. And we will create a labeling job. We'll give it a name. Data labeling, and this will be for images. And we can leave most of this alone. We'll use the automated data setup, and we just have to choose our bucket or our folder in our case, which is the wallpapers folder. You can choose a different output if you'd like, but by default, it'll place it into the same location that it's pulling the images from. And we choose our data type. So images are supported, text is supported, video is supported. In this example, we'll be using images. In terms of the role, we just need to make sure that we have access to that S3 bucket. You can create a new role and just ensure that whatever bucket you're pulling from, it has GroundTruth has access to. In this case, I have an execution role already ready, and so I can use that. And then we can complete our data setup, which is really just going when clicking this button will create a set of manifest files around your data. That was pretty quick. Great. So this will depend on the use case you have. And for images, there are a number of supported templates. So that might be image classification, so a single label versus image classification in the multi-label case, or if you're drawing bounding boxes for object detection, or segmentation. So if you're actually drawing outlines of objects, right? And so there are also text versions of this as well. That would be text classification in the single and multi-label cases, as well as entity recognition. But for us, we will be using images, and I'll use this single label classification, and we can click next. And I'll scroll up for a second. But here we can choose who will be working on this. So if this will be going to Mechanical Turk, a third party, or our private team, and we will use our private team here, and we will select our team from the list below. There's some task timeout information that's not terribly important. It is important in terms of like how long people have to work on these tasks, but for us, we're fine. And then we also have the option for automated data labeling. So I'll link some documents in this video for more information on automated data labeling, but the major piece to understand is, so I'll enable it here, but it requires that you have a lot of data points, so in the order of 1,000 or more. And when you have that many images that you're attempting to label, it will withhold a certain percentage of those that will use as its version of a validation set. And so as you label these images, then a training job will get kicked off that will then attempt to label, we'll train a model, but then we'll attempt to label some of those validation images. And it'll present those to you as sort of to determine if they're correct. And if they are correct, then things continue. And if they're not correct, then there's another training step. Below, we then can determine what our labeling task will look like for the users or for the labelers. So there's some markdown you can do. If I had more images, I might place them here, but what the user will be shown is this, and then they will be given the option of the class. So for this, I'll let people choose between animal and landscape. You can add more if you'd like, but these two are enough for me. And a brief description. Or please determine. And you just want to make sure your descriptions are descriptive enough so that the person labeling understands the intent. You can give some examples. I always recommend giving examples, and we can create. And once we have created this job, we'll see in our labeling jobs that we have an in-progress job, and it's an image classification task. And in a few seconds or so, this will show the number of objects that we have and the number of objects to be labeled. And with that, we're actually ready to perform some labeling. Okay, and so now you should see that you have a number of labeled objects to process. We've processed 0 of the 148 that we have. So let's work on that. And to reach that, you can, so if you sent yourself an email, you'll be able to access the login portal that way, and it'll ask you to change your password. But if you'd like to access it a different way, we can go through the GroundTruth and Labeling Workforces link, and we can go to our portal this way. And so if you click on this, take it to a new page, and you should see your whatever task you've set up. right? And we then will have the option to start working. So if we click that, it will load up our example, and now we have to select an option, and then we can submit for each image. So I will go through a few of these and say this is a landscape, and it'll bring up the next image. This is an animal. Next image, this is an animal. That's a landscape. And we can do this all the way through. Right? I'll call that landscape. And so as you do this, your selections are then being stored and placed into S3. And so I'll show you that next. I'll do a few more just so we have a few to look at. And that's definitely a landscape. And that's a landscape. And I'll sort of stop there. And you can't see it here, but at the top there's a little bar that gives you some information, but there's also the option to stop and exit the task. And so we can do that. And it'll give you some information about what that means, but we're fine. And we've now paused. And so we can start working again if we'd like, and pick up from where we left off. Submit. And let's say we're done. There's also a release task option that will effectively, as the description says, we'll just sort of toss away your annotations. So be careful of that. And then there's also a decline task. So we'll stop and resume later. And we want to go to our S3 bucket and then see what our annotations look like. So I went back and finished labeling the images, and once you've completed that task, you're taken back to your job screen and shown you finished your tasks, and refresh to see if there are more. From this point, we can now head to our S3 bucket and see the annotations that have been produced. All right, so we're at S3. We'll just go and look at our buckets, and we will go to the bucket that we were using for this. And so we'll go into the wallpapers folder, and if we scroll down a bit until we get to D, I believe. Next time I'll sort this by last modified, probably. But we have our data labeling images. And now we have sort of all the information of everything that we've done. I'll say the important piece one thing worth going into are the annotations. And in the annotations, you can go to the consolidated annotations. There's a lot of information with some duplicates and uses in other places, but the consolidation response, and we have iteration 1, right? Because we've only done sort of one loop with this. And we have JSON information around those annotations. So let's, is it worth opening one of these up? Sure. So I'll download one. And we can open this with the text editor of choice. And let me pull this over. Okay. And we have sort of this list of JSONs, right? So this is going to be the object ID, so which image this was effectively, and then we'll have some annotation and information. So that looks like the class name, landscape, what part of the job this was, or which job this is coming from. Was this a human annotation? Yes, in this case. And creation date, and we go to our next labeled object. right? And so you have all of this information for everything that you've annotated. Now with that, we can call this task completed for now, and let's create a new task and let's look at CSVs. Just to give you a brief introduction, we can, let's see, yep, we can look at these things. They're called sensor logs. Opening this up, we have some comma separated data, but showed so tabularly with some information. The columns aren't super important in this example, but for example, just to give you a feel, this is a timestamp, so seconds after machine start. This is the program that was run. Here's the host, and here's the command, and information like that. So the number of return variables, etc. So we're going to be labeling this, and obviously we don't have, this isn't as easy to label as the others, but in the case where you're using CSVs, it's assumed that you would have some understanding of the fields. Now let's place this into S3. So back to our buckets, I'm going to place it in the same bucket, but I will create a new folder and call this sensor logs. Seems reasonable. And in this folder, I will upload that file. Upload it. That's super quick. Now we can perform the same process, right? So we'll go back to SageMaker. Back to GroundTruth. And now we have a labeling job, and we're going to create a new labeling job. Just for reference, this one we have completed. We labeled all 148 objects. So we'll create a labeling job, and this one will be sensor log processing. Seems reasonable. And we'll choose the folder. And in this case, our data type isn't an image, it's text. And we'll choose that same role again, and we'll complete our data setup. We shouldn't see any errors here for this CSV. That's great. And scroll down. Now, in this case, what I recommend when processing CSVs is to use the text category. You can technically use a custom category and set some how you want that to be displayed. I don't find that's usually necessary if you know what the fields are. And so I will do text classification. And in this case, I'm going to use the multi-label. And again, let's go back to the top. We're using a private team. We'll select our team, our normal team. And okay. So it's worth noting that whereas before we selected the automated annotation option, that isn't available for all labeling types, and specifically for the multi-label types that isn't currently supported. So something to keep in mind. We can enter the description. I will just say the host name is the seventh entry. Obviously, if you were actually creating this, you would want to make sure you had more descriptive information. For this example, I think we're fine. And now we want to select classes. And so I will say data can be malicious, it can be benign, or we'll add an unknown tag here as well, because sometimes we're not sure. And this is how that data will present. It'll just present as the CSV line, and we can create. Great. And so now we have that sensor log processing. It's in progress. It will show the number of things we need to label here. But at this point, we can head back to our workforce and similarly then go to our portal. Okay, we are back at our job screen and we see we have a text classification job to perform. Right, and we have some descriptions here. The host name is the 7th entry, and we can start working. Now for this, so we see this information. Oh yeah, this is definitely malicious. And we can submit. Additionally, we can say unknown and benign. Right, because this is multi-labeling, multi-class labeling, or we'd say it's malicious and unknown. And it's benign, and most of this will be benign. This is malicious, obviously. And from here, so while technically you could say malicious and benign, and that's a thing you can do, that's certainly a check you want to be aware of. All right, and we can go through this the same way we did before. And the rest of this is obviously benign as well. So there, and we have completed that task. And similar to the images, we'll now have the manifest file in S3. We'll have information on our annotations, and we have completed that. So I'll jump back out into our SageMaker console. All right, and heading back out to the labeling jobs page, we see that we have completed this task and there were 18 objects labeled. And similar to the image classification case, we can go and look at the annotations as well, but we've now labeled these things. So with that, I'll thank you for your time, and please post any questions you have in the comments and I'll try and get to them. Thanks.